Back again YouTube, and welcome back to another video. And in today's video we are gonna actually go over and start building out a blueprint of our application class, which is going to be sitting in our core framework. And the idea behind this class is when you come to building your application, you can use this class to actually load up all the core components within the actual core framework, and it will execute and do what we need it to do. So again, it's going to be a simple blueprint class, which is going to take in all of our session initialization. Is going to define some constants that we can use throughout the application and framework. It's going to also set some default environmental settings, like we could set our language or time zone, default charts, etc, etc. So this is what this particular file is going to be used for, and it's going to also contain user configuration that can be set from an application point of view. So we're going to take all that information in and filter it down within this class, so we can then use it to set configuration options for some component that needs them, or that relies on these user configuration inputs. So we're going to take all that into this class, filter it down, and allow us to set up the environment or the framework according to the application that you're going to be building. So I'm going to create two files actually, because I also want to create a class that that define some constant that deals with the actual internal framework settings. Like example, we can set the framework version, etc, etc. So it'll be pretty slim for now, but again, we're going to be building it out as we go along. So the first two file I'm going to create is going to be within this Magma directory, and I'm going to create a directory which they're going to be sitting in. So I'm going to say application is what I'm going to call this directory. And the two files I'm going to create is, the first one is going to be the actual application.php, and the second is going to be a config.php. And again, they're going to be pretty simple. They're going to be the blueprint of what we're going to be doing going forward. So we're going to keep populating them with information that we can then use to do whatever we need to do. So the first class I'm going to actually work in is this config file, and this is our core config file, right? So it's going to be class PHP declare strict type equal 1 namespace magma. It's going to be application, because that's the directory that we're currently working in. The class config, and there's only two constants that I want to define for the time being, and they're going to be public constants. So the first is going to be public const, and I'm going to say magma minimum version. I'm going to equal that to our current PHP version, which is 7.4.12. And second constant is going to be public const, and it's going to be magma core version, and we're going to set that to 1.0.0, right? So this is how we're going to lay out our core configuration. You notice that I've talked about YAML quite a lot. We could have done this in YAML, but again, I want to bring it back to the entire point of this series, is that we're learning how to implement different stuff, and we're learning about YAML. Again, I could have done those in normal PHP config file, like what we're doing right now in Constants. We could have done it that way, or we could have used the core config and use it as YAML, or used YAML config within our core. But again, it's just different ways of doing stuff, and that's the beauty about coding. there's not a one way to do there's not a one way to do something. We could do something in many different ways to get the same result. We're just trying to make sure that we're doing it in the best possible way that we can do it in. And this is not a bad way to actually write config as well, by using constants. That's completely acceptable. So this is how we're going to define our core config, and the application config is going to be defined using YAMLs. Again, either, it doesn't really matter. We could have done it either way, or we're doing it how we want to do it. I'll save that. I'm going to close that file for now because that's as much as we're going to need within this file. Close it. Then our application, I'm going to define PHP blocks, declare strict types equal 1, namespace, again magma, application directory again, the class, I'm going to call it application. And this class is going to contain a constructor, and from that we can pass in any argument that we want to pass in from the application level. That's going to come into our application class. We're going to pipe it to some properties, and then we can do what we want. We can send config info off to some component that requires it, or we could do any kind of settings that we need. As I said, it's going to be a blueprint for going forward as we develop in this framework, and by the end it should be something that is set and ready, based on how we've then developed the framework going forward. So bear with it, it's going to be populated over time, but I'm going to do the base configs for now, or the base settings for now, and then we got something to actually test, which is what I want to go and do next. It's going to be public function construct, and for the time being I'm going to pass in one argument, which is going to be a string, and that's going to take the document root, because I want the application to define that document root in the application and pass it into the constructor, and then we can use it within this actual class. So I'm going to say app root, and I'm not going to initialize it because I want it to be a required argument. I'm going to create a protected string called approot as well. I'm just going to assign it to the variable in the constructor. Alright, just like that. So I'm going to make up a couple of methods that I think we're going to need, well, to start off with, and then we'll build on from there. But I know in my head I want to have a method that is called run, and that method I also want it to be a chainable method. So I want to be able to chain on different settings that we can apply out in the application environment that's going to take effect into our application class, which is going to affect our certain component work. And again, don't worry about it too much because I won't do anything off screen. I will do everything that you guys can see what I'm doing and how we're going to go about setting this up. So I'm going to create a couple of private method, and the one method, there's going to be a couple of public method actually, but we're going to have some private as well, which we only want to be used within this class. So the first is going to be a public function run. And again, I said this one, I want this to be a chaining method. So I'm going to do self as the return type, because no matter what I do in this actual method, I have to then return this. Yeah, for it to be a chaining method, I have to return the object within the method, so we can then call other method on that method, hence why it's called chaining method. So what I want to do in here, I want to actually define some code block that's going to execute, and the one that I can think of at the moment is that version compare. And what that does, that compares PHP version to whatever version we've defined within our application, to say if you're running an old PHP system and you're not up to date with what we're asking for, we're going to kill the script, right? So I'm going to actually put that in right now. So if version compare, I'm going to create a variable that's going to store PHP version. So I'm going to say PHP version equal PHP version constant. That's a PHP constant that owns the current version, and I'm going to compare it against a version that we're defining, and that's probably going to be coming from our magma or config file, I should say, which is going to be this constant. So let me just copy that, and I'm going to create a next variable and call it core version, to paste it in. And the third argument is going to be an operator, and I'm going to use the less than operator. And effectively what I'm now saying is that if PHP version is less than the core version, then we want to kill the script. And how I'm going to do that is I'm going to create or use a next PHP function called die, and that kills the script completely. And I want to return a formatted string, and for that I'm going to turn to our next PHP function called printf, right? And I'm going to put a message in saying you are running PHP %s. I'll get back to this in a minute. You are running PHP %s, but the core framework requires at least PHP S. I'm gonna get back to that in a minute. So I'm going to assign those two variables that we've created, and the first one is going to be PHP version, and the next is going to be the core version, right? And what this method does, it allows us to convert these variables to actual values by using these placeholders, right? So the order that we declare them is important, because we declare the PHP version first, and according to how we've written our sentence, you are running PHP version, but the core framework requires at least PHP core version, right? And that's pretty much what that method is doing, what that code block is doing. It's checking that you're running a version that we are saying that you need to be running in order to use this framework, and if you're not, then sorry, we're going to kill this script. And that's pretty much as far as I'm going to go for the time being, whilst I sort of like add a couple more methods within this application class. And the next method I want to declare is a private method, and I'm going to call that constants, and that's going to be void. And what I want this method to do is to define some constants, and we've already actually created some constants in previous component that we need to declare. And I can think of a few that we've actually done already, like in our YAML config file, we've got two that we've set, but there's no value. So we're going to actually fix these right now. And how you define constants is use the PHP function define, right? And it's simple key value pair, or key and value. So the key is going to be ds, which is this first one, ds, which stands for directory separator. Now PHP has got a constant that can do that, but I'm going to actually hard code it for now and put a /, which is essentially what the PHP constant is doing. Next one I want to define is the uproot, and this value is going to be what we've defined in the constructor through this property, right? That's coming in through that argument, that constructor argument. So we're going to say this uproot, just like that. So now I want to define some the path to the application config files. So I'm going to say define config path, and going to use uproot, concatenate that / through that directory separator, concatenate the directory name, which is going to be config, right? Which is what we've got up here in our document root. So we're going to say our next one is going to be define, and I believe the next one is within this base view template, which is that template path. Let's just copy that, put that in. I'm going to say uproot dot. So I want my view templates to be in the application app directory, and the app directory is going to contain the controller files, the models, etc. I also want the view templates to be within that directory. So I'm going to say uproot, which is our document root separator, and it's going to be an app directory, which the application has to have that directory / templates, and it's going to be lowercase templates. And notice that this template represents a directory, and if I take you back to this base view template, we've also got it within this file system loader templates, so we're pointing to that exact directory right here, right? I'll save that. Now I think that is all the constants. I think not actually. I think there's one more that we created that we need to try and find, and that was coming from our error handling actually. Yeah, that log directory, need to define that as well. So just say define log directory. Now again, we're going to go back into the document root by saying uproot ds, and we can store our logs in a temporary directory. So I'm going to say tmp, and we're going to put that log as a subdirectory within this tmp directory. I'm going to call it, so what we call it around here is log / let's call it log, right? So that's going to store all of our log files or error log files within this directory when we're in production mode. When we're in developers mode, that won't happen because we're going to see that exception on the screen. And the next method I want to create is also going to be a private method, and I'm going to call it environment. And this is going to take care of declaring some default values. It's going to also change some of PHP init configuration values as well. So I can actually declare one so you can see what I'm saying. So I'm going to say init set, and we can change the default char set, and I'm going to set a hard code value for now because I also want the value to be coming from the user configuration file, which we're going to be implementing, so the user can define these, or if they don't, then it will revert to the default. So I'm going to say UTF-8, right? There's other ones that we're going to be implementing, but we're going to be coming back to that in a bit. And the next method I want to create is a method that takes care of our error handling class, because at the minute it doesn't actually do anything. It's just a file in our core that's just sitting there. So we need to initialize that, and how we're going to do that is through PHP function that they provide us, which is the set error handler and the set exception handler, and that allows us to actually use our own error handling file, our error handling class, and we're going to implement that or inject that in now. through a private method. I'm going to say private function. I'm going to call it error handler. I'm going to make that a void because it won't return anything. So I'm going to say, I'm going to make sure all error is turned on. So I'm going to say error reporting to E all pipe E strict. Right, just like that. And the next method is a PHP function, and it's going to allow us to convert all errors into exception. And it's going to be called set error handler. And what this method requires is a path to that actual error handling file and the method that we're going to execute, which is this error handler method. So I'm going to say, in parentheses, I'm going to say magma error handling, which is this directory right here. We're in the magma directory. We're coming down to the error handling directory, and the class is also called error handling. So I'm going to say error handling. This is namespacing. We could have defined this outside, but we're going to define it within the actual function. And because we're using static method, we're going to use a colon, yeah, error handler. And that's it. Now the next one is set exception handler, and it's going to be the same except for the actual method name. So I'm going to copy this, to paste it in, and I'm going to change the argument, well, the method, to exception handler. I'm just going to paste it in. So effectively what we're doing is, with the first function, we're converting all of PHP errors to exception, and then we're setting our own exception handler so we can deal with exception how we want to deal with it. We could display it how we want to display it. So we're taking full control of how we're handling errors in our application. And what else? Now I need to execute, because as I was saying, these methods are private methods, so I need to execute them some way, and I'm going to do that within this run method. So at the very top, I want to call my constants method, because you notice, well, you can't, well, it's not here, but if I want to use any constant within this method, then I have to declare this constant at the very top, and I will be using constant in here as we build it out. So I want to call this constant at the very top. Then I can call my environment, then my error handler method down here. So this environment, yep, and this error handler, right? And return this always need to be the last line within this method. Now we're getting an error right here because we've not yet actually called this in properly. So I want to say, which is this config file right here, we can call that in. And let me call that in properly. Let me close some of these files because we're finished with them. And at the top, I'm going to say use magma application config, right? I'm bringing that config file in that we've just created right here. So I'm going to say config : magma minimum version, and that's pretty much how you use constant with : class reference : and the constant, right? So that's as much as we want to be doing in this file for the time being, and I'm going to actually create a index file, and we're going to test that this file can be initialized. So let's just do that, and see, I've already got an index file in our document root. So let's just initialize that, make sure that it actually works. So let's close this. And what I was saying as well is, what was I saying actually? Yeah, the constructor requires that one argument, which is the document path or document root. So we're going to actually pass that in. We're going to define it within this index and pass it in. But let me say as well, in a real world application, this index file will probably be in a public directory with a htaccess file, which is going to block any access from our application code. So, but we're testing this in this directory. When we come to set up our application, it's going to be in a public directory, and we're going to have a index file in our actual document, in our actual application code, which is going to just redirect you back to that, or redirect you into that public directory. Again, I don't think I've explained that very well, but stay with me for a bit. Let's just test it out, and when we come to implement that application, then I'll go over it and you see what I'm saying. Right, so I'm going to actually define, well, open some PHP blocks, and I'm going to define a next constant, which is going to define the root, or the document root. So I'm going to say define, and I'm going to call it app root. We can't actually, because we've used that. Yeah, let's call it root directory, right? And let's say real path directory name to this PHP magic constant, and that's going to actually echo out the actual directory root. And we can actually test that. Let's just test that as we go along, because I'm going to switch my screen so you can see what I've got. And you can see I've got a page right here. I'm going to start up my development server, and we're going to echo this out and see what we get. So if we reload this page, we get directed to the XAMPP dashboard, and we just need to like go to our project file or project folder, which is called framework. You can see undefined constant root directory, right? And why is this undefined? Let's work that out. It's undefined because we've created an error. It needs to be in quotes like that, right? And that should take care of that error. So if we reload, that error is gone, right? So let's echo out root directory and see what we're getting. So we're getting the path to our actual framework directory. So that's fine. That's all we need. So we know that we're now within our framework actual directory. So the next thing I want to do within this index is an actual simulation of what the public index file is going to look like. I will need to bring in that composer autoloader, because we want that to be at the very top, so we can actually use the classes that we've got within our core. So it's going to be, say, autoload, and we're going to use this constant right here. So I'm going to say autoload equal root directory, and we want to go in that vendor folder. So I'm going to say / vendor autoload.php, right? So I'm going to say if it's an actual file, autoload, let's require it in. Require it once, or just require, and we're going to say autoload. And that effectively, because we've already got composer set up, that effectively should give us the ability to load our classes internally, and we're going to actually try that out now. So we've saved that. Let's reload again. Got no errors, so that's fine. And let's bring a namespace in to this application class. So I'm going to say use Magma application, right? So I'm going to store this object within, or create a new object, and then do the var dump and see what it prints out. I'm going to say app equal new application, right? And remember that this needs the argument for the document root, which is this root directory constant. I'm going to pass that straight in. I'm going to say root directory, just like that, right? I'm going to do var dump and say app and see what that prints out. So there we go. You can see that it's actually printing out our object, or application object, and I'm quite happy with that, because now I know that it's actually working. We've got a server set up, we've just var dump our application class, and it's just printed out that object. So perfect, we know that's actually working. So again, we won't be going too much into this. I'm just happy that it's actually working. We've got something on the screen that's showing up, and we now got a good direction to go forward in. But I would actually be executing this class. I'll be wrapping it in parentheses. I'm going to say new application, passing that required argument, and then I can call that run method like so. Let's actually, you won't see anything at the minute because that run method doesn't actually return anything. But if I go into application again and I just comment these out for temporarily, then I can say echo working, and let's take this off because it's going to throw an error. I'm going to test it out temporarily and let's see what happens. Now we know we're hitting that run method, which is perfectly fine. So all we're declaring it right here is acceptable, and the idea behind this run method is that I can then chain on other bits that I can then, something like set session, or we can define our session passing some parameters that's going to filter down into our session component to set it up for instance of the current application that is currently running the framework, etc., etc. But again, I'm quite happy with the start of this application file that we've created. It's a simple blueprint that we're going to use to build out an actual file that we can use to initialize our core components going forward. But I'm quite happy that the class is actually working, and yeah, let's actually end the video on that note. But stay tuned because we're going to be putting out a next video pretty soon. And remember guys to like, share and subscribe to the channel. Stay tuned for more videos coming up pretty shortly. Thanks and bye.